A person who does not face the darkness within will continue to live under its control and call it fate. These are the words of Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and one of the most influential minds in the field of psychology. He was the man who dared to give a name to the part of ourselves we spend most of our lives trying to hide the shadow. You might think sitting alone in silence is a peaceful act, but for many, that silence is deafening. The moment the world around them grows quiet, the noise inside begins. Doubt, fear, shame, old voices, old wounds. It's not peace they find, but chaos. And that is not by accident. Jung believed that what we suppress does not disappear. It waits. It waits in the unconscious. And from there, it influences our choices, our relationships, our reactions, without us even realizing it. The shadow is not evil by nature. It is simply unacknowledged, unseen, unloved. And yet, it holds power over us until we turn to face it. Imagine this. A woman sits quietly in a room. No music, no phone, no one calling her name. From the outside, it looks like peace. But inside her, a war is unfolding. Regret, insecurity, the need to be perfect, the memory of words she wishes she could unhear, the fear of not being enough. She is alone, but she is not with herself. She is with everything she tried to avoid. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What if the patterns you repeat, the people you attract, the mistakes you make, the things that trigger you are not random? What if they are messengers? What if they are parts of yourself trying to be seen? We live in a world that teaches us to run, to numb, to distract. But healing does not happen in avoidance. It happens in confrontation. And not the aggressive kind, but the gentle, honest, unwavering kind. The kind that begins with silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of facing. Carl Jung was not just a thinker. He was a guide for the inward journey. He gave us a language for the unseen, the shadow, the persona, the self. And at the heart of his work lies one radical idea. Wholeness is not found in perfection, but in integration. The parts of you you reject, your anger, your jealousy, your shame, they do not disappear. They become your shadow. And that shadow, if unacknowledged, becomes your master. But if seen, it becomes your teacher. Have you ever sat in silence and felt more exhausted than after a day of talking? Have you ever tried to rest, only to find yourself restless? That is not weakness. That is signal. That is your psyche asking for your attention. There is a momentous sacred one that comes when you stop running, when you stop needing to fix, to explain, to perform, and instead, you sit, you breathe, and you begin to ask, what lives inside me that I have not dared to meet? This is not a video about psychology in the academic sense. This is about you and your inner world, your fears, your stories, your shadow. It is not about fixing you. It is about seeing you completely. So if you've ever felt like something inside you is waiting to be named, if you've ever felt like you're chasing peace but keep finding noise, if you've ever sat in silence and realized it wasn't quiet at all, then stay. Stay until the end of this journey. Because what you're looking for out there may have been hiding inside you all along. The shadow, according to Carl Jung, is not some abstract, distant concept reserved for psychologists. It is personal, it is intimate. It is in many ways painfully familiar. The shadow is everything within us that we deny, reject, suppress, or simply cannot accept. And because we refuse to face it, it becomes the most dangerous part of who we are. Think about the last time you were angry but said you were fine. The moment you felt jealousy but masked it with politeness. The instant you felt insecure and covered it up with arrogance. These are not just moods. They are glimpses into the shadow. They are invitations, uncomfortable, yes, but necessary. The shadow includes our rage, our envy, our fear, our shame, our guilt, and even our most primal desires. But it is not evil, it is simply human. And yet, because we are taught to only show the parts of ourselves that are pleasant, kind, and socially acceptable, we push everything else down. We become half present in our own lives, performing the version of ourselves that is easiest for others to accept. But here is the truth. What you suppress does not die. It waits. And when ignored long enough, it finds other ways to surface. Passive aggression, emotional outbursts, anxiety, addiction, projection. We think we are in control, but often we are being controlled by the very parts of ourselves we pretend do not exist. Carl Jung warned that the shadow, when unacknowledged, takes over from the unconscious. It sabotages relationships. It creates inner conflict. It clouds our judgment. We begin to act out stories we do not even know we're writing. Let's take a simple example. Someone who constantly feels the need to rescue others. Always giving. Always helping. On the surface, it looks noble. But underneath, there may be a fear of being abandoned. A belief that love must be earned. That if they are not useful, they will not be needed. This person is not helping from freedom. They are helping from fear. And that fear lives in the shadow. Or take someone who constantly judges others for being loud or emotional. They may believe they are simply valuing calm and rationality. But often, what they cannot tolerate in others is something they were never allowed to express themselves. Maybe as children, they were punished for crying or told to be quiet. Now, when they see that energy in someone else, it triggers something unhealed inside them. The shadow always finds a way to speak. Sometimes in our reactions, sometimes in our patterns, sometimes in the people we attract. That is why Jung often said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What we see in others is a mirror, especially what we react to with intensity. There is a kind of emotional honesty required to meet your shadow, a willingness to stop pretending, to stop justifying, to stop blaming the world for patterns that repeat inside you. It is not comfortable work. It will not look good on social media, but it is the beginning of freedom. Because when you begin to see your shadow, something shifts. You stop expecting perfection from others. You become less reactive, less judgmental. Not because you are passive, but because you understand. You understand that everyone is carrying something they have not yet faced. And more importantly, you begin to understand yourself. You see where your wounds shaped your defenses, where your shame shaped your ambition, where your fear shaped your silence. This is not self-blame. This is self-awareness. And from that awareness, healing begins. You cannot heal what you will not look at. You cannot love what you are unwilling to acknowledge. The shadow is not a threat to be defeated. It is a part of you that wants to be seen, heard, and held. It is the younger version of you that never got to speak. It is the anger you were told was wrong, the sadness you were told to hide, the needs you were told were too much. Meeting your shadow is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. And wholeness does not come from only loving the light. It comes from learning to hold the dark with compassion. So the next time you feel something rise in you, something uncomfortable, something ugly, pause. Do not run. Do not shame it. Ask it, gently, what are you trying to tell me? That is how the shadow begins to soften, not through force, but through presence, not through rejection, but through recognition. And in that recognition, you begin to reclaim your power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to live without hiding. The power to respond, rather than react. The power to be seen, fully light and shadow alike. We all wear masks. Some are subtle, some are polished. Some we have worn for so long that we forget they are not our real face. Carl Jung called this mask the personate social face we present to the world. Crafted not from authenticity, but from adaptation. It is who we think we need to be in order to be accepted, loved, respected, or simply left alone. The persona is not a lie. It is a strategy. We learn early in life what parts of us are welcomed and what parts are not. A child who gets praised for being quiet learns to silence their voice. A teenager who is told to be strong hides their tears. An adult who is rewarded for productivity masks their exhaustion. Over time, we begin to perform instead of express, respond instead of feel, and exist in a version of ourselves designed for others, not for truth. Beneath the persona lives the ego, or the I that tries to maintain control, stability, and a sense of identity. The ego is not the enemy. In fact, we need it. It helps us navigate daily life, make decisions, and hold a coherent sense of self. But the problem arises when the ego becomes obsessed with protecting the persona, when it starts to believe that the mask is the real face. This is where inner tension begins. That tightness you feel when you say yes but want to say no. The smile that appears when you're actually breaking inside. The moment you laugh just to fill a silence that makes you uncomfortable. These are not just social habits. They are signals. They point to a deeper conflict between who you are and who you think you have to be. Many of us wake up each day not as ourselves, but as a role. The good partner, the reliable friend, the perfect employee, the strong one, the funny one, the one who never complains. And we wear these roles like armor. But deep down we know. We feel the weight. The distance between our inner world and our outer expression begins to grow, and with it, the feeling of disconnection not just from others, but from ourselves. Jung believed that true transformation does not begin by becoming someone new, but by remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembering requires honesty, radical honesty. You have to ask yourself, who am I when I stop performing? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I without the mask? There is a quiet kind of grief that comes when you realize how much of your life has been shaped by the need to be accepted. When you notice how many moments you said what was expected, rather than what was true. How often you made yourself smaller so others could feel comfortable. How many times you laughed when what you really needed was to be held. But this grief is not a punishment. It is a portal. It is the moment you begin to turn inward, not to collapse, but to reconnect. To start peeling back the layers. Not with violence, but with care. To meet the self you have hidden, not because it was unworthy, but because it was unprotected. Let's be honest. It is terrifying to take off the mask, to show up in your rawness, to speak when your voice shakes, to say, I am not okay, in a world that rewards strength over sincerity. But the more we wear the persona, the more disconnected we become from our essence, and without that connection, even our success feels hollow. Even love can feel like performance. When you begin to notice the gap between your image and your truth, do not rush to fix it. Just sit with it. Breathe into it. That discomfort is not a flaw, it is an awakening. It is your soul reminding you that you were not born to be a mask. You were born to be whole. And wholeness is not about being liked. It is about being real. It takes courage to let go of the persona. But on the other side of that, letting go is something sacred. A life that no longer depends on approval. Relationships built on authenticity, not performance. A voice that no longer trembles for permission to speak. A self that no longer feels like a stranger. This is not the end of your mask. It is the beginning of your return. And in that return, you find not just freedom but truth. There is a moment when a woman sits in silence and realizes she no longer needs to prove anything. She is not hiding. She is not waiting. She is simply being. That moment, quiet and uncelebrated, is one of the most powerful moments of her life. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that inner stillness is not emptiness. It is a threshold. It is the space where the unconscious begins to rise, the shadow begins to speak, and the self, long buried under masks and noise, begins to emerge. We live in a world that fears silence. Every second is filled with notifications, conversations, demands, distractions. We are taught that silence is awkward, uncomfortable, even dangerous. But silence is not absence. It is presence. It is the sacred space where the real conversation begins not with others, but with ourselves. Jung taught that the unconscious does not shout. It whispers. And in order to hear it, we must get quiet. Not just externally, but internally. That means stepping away from performance. It means putting down the phone, turning off the noise, sitting not to scroll, but to feel, not to react, but to observe. At first, this can feel unbearable. When you sit in silence, everything you have been avoiding tends to rise. Regrets, questions, unresolved emotions, the voices of your inner critic. It feels like chaos, but it is actually the beginning of order. It is the shadow surfacing, not to harm you, but to be heard. Most people run from this moment. They fill it with tasks, with entertainment, with conversations that mean little but keep the silence away. But what if you stayed? What if, instead of running from the discomfort, you breathed through it? There is a reason silence is so transformative. From a neurological perspective, it engages the parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for rest, for digestion, for clarity. When we are constantly reacting, our bodies stay in fight or flight, our minds stay clouded. But when we get still, the body softens, the mind begins to clear. Insight becomes possible. Jung believed that stillness is where integration begins. You cannot integrate what you refuse to acknowledge, and acknowledgement requires presence. Not judgment, not analysis, just presence. To sit with what arises, to witness it without needing to fix it. One of the simplest and most profound practices is sitting in silence for a few minutes each day without distractions. No phone, no music, no task, just you and your breath. This is not a performance. No one will see it. No one will applaud it. But over time, something begins to shift. Your nervous system calms, your thoughts slow, and you begin to feel the subtle movements of your inner world. Another practice is journaling, not for productivity, not to be quoted, but to empty what is unspoken. Write without editing. Let the words come raw, fragmented, real. This is not about grammar. It is about truth. When you write like this, you begin to hear yourself. Not the version of you that performs, but the one that waits behind the noise. Silence can also be a form of boundary. Not the silence of resentment or avoidance, but the silence of alignment. When you no longer need to explain yourself to be valid. When you can choose not to respond without guilt. When your calm becomes your statement. This kind of silence is not passive. It is rooted. It is a decision, a declaration. I will not abandon myself for the comfort of others. Jung understood that facing the shadow was not about confrontation with force. It was about creating the right environment. Silence is that environment. When you are no longer filling every space, the deeper truths begin to emerge. You see the patterns. You recognize the wounds. You feel the unmet needs. And in that awareness, healing begins. But let us be clear, silence is not the goal. It is the ground. It is not an escape from conversation. It is preparation for true dialogue that begins within and then moves outward. When you speak from silence, your words carry weight. When you act from stillness, your choices align with truth. To sit with yourself in silence is not to withdraw from life. It is to return to it with clarity. To see not just the surface but the roots. To stop reacting to every wave and instead anchor in your depth. That is not weakness. It is power. It is not avoidance. It is readiness. So if you find yourself in a moment of stillness, let it stretch. Do not fill it too quickly. Let it breathe. Let it open. And listen. Because what rises in that silence may not always be easy, but it will always be true. And truth, when met with compassion, has the power to heal. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This is the foundation of what he called the mirror effect. It is the idea that our emotional reactions to other people, what we love, what we resent, what triggers us are not just about them. They are reflections of something within us, often something unacknowledged, unhealed, or misunderstood. Imagine this. You meet someone who talks too much, takes up too much space, constantly seeks attention. You feel instantly annoyed, maybe even judgmental. But instead of asking why they are so loud, what if you asked why it bothers you so much? Is it because you were taught to stay quiet? To not be too much? To keep your needs small and your voice softer than your truth? Their expression may be triggering the parts of you that were once silenced. That is the mirror. Or maybe you find yourself repeatedly drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable. You give, you wait, you hope, and then you feel disappointed. Again, it is easy to blame them. But what if the pattern is pointing to a belief inside you that love must be earned, that you are not worthy of receiving without proving, that you equate unpredictability with passion? Again, the outside reflects the inside. The mirror effect is not meant to shame you. It is meant to awaken you. Your reactions are not failures. They are feedback. They show you where attention is needed, not outside, but within. What you admire in others often represents your potential. What you resent often reveals your wounds. And what you envy shows you what you believe you are not allowed to have. One of the most powerful insights Jung offered was that our relationships are rarely random. They are mirrors of our unconscious. If you constantly attract controlling partners, it may not just be bad luck. It could be a reflection of an inner chaos parts of you that feel unsafe, ungrounded, or unsure. Sometimes, the control you experience is echoing your own inability to regulate your emotional world. You may unconsciously hand over your power to those who seem more certain, only to feel suffocated later. The mirror is also present in love. The qualities you fall in love with in others are often parts of yourself that you have not yet claimed. Their freedom, their creativity, their strength. You see it in them because it lives in you, even if you have not yet allowed it to fully express. Love is not just attraction, it is recognition. But the mirror is clearest in conflict. When someone says something that pierces, ask yourself, why does this hurt so much? Is it because it is untrue, or because a part of you fears it might be true? Is it because they disrespected you, or because a part of you still struggles to hold boundaries? The mirror reveals what still needs to be healed. This is not about blaming yourself for other people's behavior. It is about reclaiming your power. When you stop trying to fix others and start paying attention to your own emotional responses, you grow. You shift from reaction to reflection, from blame to awareness. Awareness gives you choice. Once you see a pattern, you are no longer trapped in it. You can pause. You can inquire. You can choose differently. That is what growth looks like, not perfection, but presence. Think of the mirror not as a punishment, but as a guide. It shows you what you are ready to see. And once seen, you can no longer pretend. You begin to ask new questions. Why do I need this person to validate me? Why do I keep giving to those who take? Why do I feel threatened by their confidence? Each question opens a door back to yourself. When you use relationships as mirrors, they stop being battlegrounds. They become classrooms. Every encounter becomes an invitation to go deeper, to listen, to understand, to grow. This does not mean you accept mistreatment. It means you recognize the difference between your pain and their behavior. You set boundaries not from anger, but from clarity. You walk away not to punish, but to protect your peace. In the end, the mirror teaches you one simple truth. What you see outside often begins inside. When you bring compassion to that reflection, you stop fighting your own image. You begin to integrate it. And in doing so, you become whole. There was a woman named Ellen who had spent most of her adult life avoiding a part of herself she could not name. On the surface, she was composed, accomplished, reliable. She was the kind of person others turned to in crisis, the one who held it all together. But in quiet moments, when no one needed her, something hollow echoed within, a kind of sadness that had no clear source, a weight that no success could lift. For years, she believed she had simply outgrown her emotions, that she had moved on from the pain of the past. After all, childhood was a long time ago. What good could come from digging it back up? But then came the anxiety, the recurring dreams, the constant sense that something was missing, even in moments that should have felt full. And so, she did what most of us fear. She stopped running. She began therapy. She began writing. She began sitting in silence, not as an escape, but as an opening. And slowly, the memories came. Not all at once, not like a flood, but in flashes. The look on her father's face when he walked out the door. The way her mother tightened her jaw instead of crying. The silence that lived in their home long after the shouting stopped. These were not just memories, they were roots. Roots of patterns she had lived for decades, overgiving, overperforming, disappearing in relationships, fearing abandonment even when she was deeply loved. She did not collapse under the weight of these realizations. She softened. For the first time, she stopped blaming herself for being too sensitive. She stopped calling herself dramatic. She began to see that what she thought was weakness had been survival, that her silence was not strength, it was a defense. and that the little girl inside her had been waiting all this time to be seen, not fixed. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Ellen's healing did not come from avoiding the darkness. It came from entering it gently, with courage and compassion. She stopped asking why it happened and started asking how it shaped her. She stopped needing to be invulnerable and began practicing honesty. She forgave herself for not knowing what she could not have known. She reclaimed the years lost to fear, not by erasing them, but by understanding them. Her relationships changed. She no longer needed to please to feel safe. She no longer stayed in places where her presence was not valued. Her voice became steadier, her decisions clearer, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer controlled her from the shadows. This is what it means to step into your darkness, not to drown in it, not to be consumed by it, but to light a candle and walk inward, to meet the younger version of yourself who was never comforted, to listen, to hold, and to finally say, "I see you. You were never too much. You were simply too alone." Healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. It is not always beautiful. It is not always easy, but it is always worth it. And if you are on that path, if you are beginning to look inward, if the silence is starting to whisper instead of shout, then take heart. You are not going backward. You are returning. If you are on the journey of coming home to yourself, do not walk alone. Subscribe, and together we will explore the darkness, not to be afraid of it, but to understand it, to reclaim it, and to find, in its depths, the light that was always yours. There comes a moment when you stop running, not because you have arrived at some final destination, but because you finally understand there is nothing to escape. The fear that once chased you, the pain that once haunted you, the shadow you once avoided, all of it is still there. But it no longer has power over you, because now you see it. You have named it. You have sat with it in silence. And in doing so, you have taken back your life. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming oneself. Not the self you were told to be, not the self you pretended to be, but the self that has always existed beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the mask. Individuation is not about perfection. It is about wholeness. It is the integration of all parts, the light and the shadow, the known and the forgotten, the strength and the softness. You begin to feel it in small, subtle ways. You no longer react with urgency when someone misunderstands you. You do not rush to defend every boundary or explain every decision. You do not try to be agreeable at the cost of your truth. You are not hiding, and you are not performing. You are simply here, present, clear, anchored. And in that presence, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were once scattered. The little pieces you left behind, to be accepted, to be loved, to be safe. You gather them, you hold them, you bring them home. The person who once felt fragmented begins to feel whole. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with yourself has. You are no longer waiting for others to give you permission to exist. You give that to yourself, quietly, consistently. Remember the image we began with, a person sitting in silence, still, surrounded by their own thoughts. In the beginning, that silence felt loud, unbearable, full of echoes and questions. But now, that same silence becomes sacred. It becomes a sanctuary. You no longer fear what rises in the stillness, because you know how to meet it with breath, with awareness, with kindness. This is not a dramatic rebirth. It does not announce itself with noise. It does not demand applause. It is gentle, gradual, like the soft return of your own voice, like remembering your own name after years of forgetting. It is not something you chase. It is something you allow. You begin to move differently. You speak with more care, not because you are cautious, but because your words carry truth. You say no without guilt. You say yes with full presence. You do not rush to fill every silence. You do not seek to win every argument. You let things unfold. You let people reveal who they are. And you no longer feel the need to edit yourself to be chosen. This is not detachment. It is discernment. It is the peace that comes from knowing who you are and no longer needing to prove it. The freedom of not performing is one of the most sacred forms of peace, and it comes only when you have faced the parts of yourself that once made you feel unworthy. Jung understood that true healing is not loud. It does not always look like transformation. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone without feeling lonely. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to reply. Sometimes it looks like breathing deeply instead of reacting. These moments, though quiet, are powerful. They are the signs that you are no longer at war with yourself. When you reach this place, the world does not suddenly become easier, but it becomes clearer. You see through patterns faster. You honor your energy more. You choose relationships that feel safe, not just exciting. You stop being pulled in every direction, because you are no longer trying to escape. You have returned, and that return, however soft, however slow, is what Jung called individuation. It is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of living from your center, with presence, with truth, with peace. You do not need to be perfect to begin. You do not need to have all the answers, or a plan, or even the right words. You only need to be honest with what you feel in this moment. That is where every journey begins. Not in control, but in truth. What you have heard is not just a story. It is an invitation to pause, to look inward, to see not only what you have become, but what you may have abandoned along the way. Your silence, your emotions, your needs, your voice. This is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming whole. Carl Jung taught that the path to wholeness is not linear. It is not clean or predictable. It spirals inward. It asks us to revisit old wounds with new eyes, to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, to see ourselves fully, not just in the light, but in the shadow. You do not need to rush this process. You only need to begin. Begin by sitting still. Begin by listening. Begin by being honest with what arises. That is where healing lives. In the moment you stop turning away. So if something in this story felt like it belonged to you, if even a single sentence echoed something you've been carrying in silence, then let that be enough. Let it be the starting point. And if you feel called, leave a comment. Not to impress, but to express. Not to explain, but simply to be seen. And if you want to walk deeper into this kind of dialogue, subscribe. Not for more noise, but for more moments like this, quiet, honest, and real. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is return to ourselves and stay.